Greetings world, we are anonymous. An urgent action bulletin circulating in the Kremlin today prepared by the Foreign Intelligence Service, SVR, states that the Republican massacre that occurred near Washington, D.C. yesterday was a not-so-subtle birthday gift to President Donald Trump from George Soros, who considers himself a god and is called the most evil man in the world, one of whose community organizers, named James Hodgkinson, attempted to assassinate up to 14 Republican Party lawmakers, but is being thwarted from doing so by the quick-action U.S. Capitol Police special agents, and, of course, the known fact that leftist communist radicals are notorious for being inept assassins. According to this bulletin, the authority granted to the SVR under Federation laws, rules and regulations to investigate and report on this Republican massacre rests on this foreign intelligence agency being permitted to monitor activities relating to U.S. military troop movements, specifically in this case, the movements and activities relating to the headquarters of the U.S. Transportation Command located at Scott Air Force Base in St. Clair County, Illinois. In early March 2017, this bulletin continues. A SVR surveillance report noted that an independent housing inspector having access to Scott Air Force Base, named James Hodgkinson, was making continuous visits to a radical leftist American political organization named Campaign for America's Future, CAF, located at 1825 K Street, Northwest, in Washington, D.C. and that is a long-known radical communist entity funded by George Soros. This Campaign for America's Future radical organization says it seeks to delegitimize and dismantle conservatism while advancing progressive agendas vis-à-vis taxes, the economy, healthcare, education, social welfare programs, the environment, and energy policy, this bulletin explains, and James Hodgkinson was determined by SVR analysts to be in training to become one of its community organizers for his home city of Belleville, Illinois. That is the county seat of St. Clair County and located minutes away from Scott Air Force Base. Important to know why James Hodgkinson would associate himself with a radical communist organization seeking to tax America's wealthiest citizens and companies, this bulletin details, is due to his home city of Belleville being the most populated city in the Metro East region of the St. Louis metropolitan area that comprises two states, Illinois and Missouri. Anyone like James Hodgkinson living in a city like Belleville, this bulletin continues, sees on a daily basis the crushing tax disparity between what are called liberal and conservative states, with James Hodgkinson's Liberal Democratic Party-ruled state of Illinois having the second highest property tax rate in the United States, nearly double the national average, as opposed to the conservative Republican Party-ruled state of Missouri whose property tax rate is one of lowest in that nation. Since at least 2012, this bulletin says, James Hodgkinson railed in numerous public letters to his local newspaper against the taxes that were crushing both his professional and personal life, but who instead of slamming the Liberal Democratic Party who made his state of Illinois an economic disaster that is doomed to collapse, blamed all of his tax woes on the Republican Party. Belonging to numerous anti-Republican Party groups such as The Road to Hell is Paved with Republicans, Terminate the Republican Party and Donald Trump is Not My President, this bulletin notes, James Hodgkinson fit the exact profile of radical leftist extremists recruited by the proudly self-proclaimed Nazi sympathizer George Soros, and who the day prior to President Trump taking office, stated that this would-be dictator is going to fail and is said to be behind the plot to topple Trump from power. As much as George Soros was enamored with his new community organizer political terrorist James Hodgkinson, this bulletin continues, so too was James Hodgkinson enamored with George Soros, so much so, in fact, that after a Change.org petition titled Federally Indict George Soros for funding various terrorist and cartel groups was posted, James Hodgkinson replied to it in March 2017, by counter-posting to Change.org, Trump is a traitor. Trump has destroyed our democracy. It's time to destroy Trump and co. With George Soros pouring tens of millions of dollars into American propaganda radical leftist media organizations to destroy President Trump, this bulletin says, The media incitement to kill Republican Party lawmakers in U.S. has now reached levels not seen since the U.S. Civil War, and though the political terrorist assassin James Hodgkinson, who called for killing as many Republicans as possible and said that President Trump is truly the biggest asshole we have ever had in the Oval Office, is now dead, anyone believing that he just stumbled upon the location where Republican Party lawmakers were practicing their baseball sport in the early morning hours in a quiet Washington, D.C. suburb yesterday would be wise to know how Soros's communist network really works. And as exampled, this bulletin concludes, by the cryptic 13th of June Twitter posting of Gizmodo Media Group's radical communist left-wing reporter Anna Merlin less than 24 hours prior to James Hodgkinson's rampage that said, "I had a terrible nightmare that a defensive, slightly sweaty Keebler elf was yelling at Congress and it's still happening?" And that she laughingly followed by further posting about James Hodgkinson. If the deep state is real, they definitely gave that man his Twitter account, and is to be expected of a George Soros reporter who was described as, "Anna Merlin's been lying her whole life. She's a Nimrod-class sociopath and detention whore, who uses lies to construct her glowing self-conception. A sane society would shun her kind to the icy wastelands, and never allow her to sully any respectable organization. We are anonymous. We are legion. We do not forgive. We do not forget. Expect us."